One second I was standing at the top of the stairs with a laundry basket in my arms, and the next I was at the bottom, and something in my left ankle felt like it had snapped clean in two. I didn't scream. I don't know why. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe 63 years of keeping yourself together doesn't just switch off because you're lying on a hardwood floor at 7 in the morning with nobody home and nobody coming. I lay there for what I later found out was nearly 50 minutes. The cat came and sat next to my head. That's the kind of detail you remember. My name is Loretta. No, wait, I've told this story so many times in my own head that I sometimes forget where to start. Let me try again. My name isn't important. What matters is that I am 67 years old. I lived in a 2-story colonial in Asheville, North Carolina, the same house my late husband and I bought in 1989 when our daughter was 4 years old and our son was still a baby. My husband passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to gone, and after that it was just me and the house and the cat and the garden out back where I still grew tomatoes every summer, because he loved them and I couldn't bring myself to stop. I was not a burden. I want to make that clear before anything else. I paid my own bills. I drove myself to my own doctor's appointments. I shoveled my own driveway in winter, which my son told me every single year was going to kill me before anything else did. I did not call my children to complain. I did not guilt them. I did not show up uninvited. I had my book club on Thursdays and my neighbor across the street and my sister down in Savannah, who I talked to every Sunday. I had a life. I was fine. And then I wasn't. It was a Tuesday in February, I remember, because I'd been dreading the week. My Medicare supplemental renewal was due, and I'd been putting off the paperwork. The laundry basket was full of winter blankets I'd washed over the weekend. The top step caught my sock funny. That's all it takes, I guess. One step, one moment of not paying attention, and then the floor. My left ankle was broken in 2 places. 2 ribs were cracked. I had a concussion that I didn't know about until later. The thing I remember most from those 50 minutes on the floor was not the pain, though the pain was extraordinary. It was the absolute quiet of the house, and the understanding, slow and cold and settling in like February air through a drafty window, that there was nobody coming. I had my phone in the pocket of my robe. That was the only lucky thing. I called 911. The dispatcher kept me talking. The paramedics came and they were kind, and one of them, a young woman with her hair pulled back, held my hand in the ambulance and told me everything was going to be okay in a way that made me believe her. In the ER they asked for an emergency contact. I gave them my daughter's number. She's 42. Lives in Scottsdale, Arizona with her husband and their 2 kids, my grandchildren, who I have seen exactly 4 times in 3 years. They called her. She didn't answer. They called again. She didn't answer. They called her husband. He didn't answer either. By the time I was being prepped for surgery to set the ankle, the hospital had made 11 calls between the 2 of them. 11. And not once, not a single time, did either of them pick up. I didn't find out about the calls until after. While I was under, while someone was putting screws into my ankle, my daughter and her husband were in Sedona. I know this because when I finally got to my hospital room and found my phone on the tray table and turned it on, I had 0 missed calls from my daughter. 0. But I had a notification, because we follow each other on Instagram, and she had posted at 2014 in the afternoon, right around when I was in recovery, a photo of the 2 of them at some resort pool with red rocks in the background. She was in a white swimsuit. He had a drink in his hand. The caption said, "Disconnecting to reconnect. No news, no noise, Just us. We needed this so badly. 47 likes. I put the phone down. I looked at the ceiling of that hospital room. I had a roommate on the other side of the curtain who was watching game shows. The laugh track kept going and going. And I just lay there and I thought, she knew I might call. She chose not to. That's the thing that took me the longest to get to. It wasn't that she was busy. It wasn't that she missed the calls by accident. She had made a decision before she ever left for that trip that she was going to be unreachable, that whatever might come in from home could wait until she was ready to deal with it, and that decision included me. A nurse, her name was Paulette, and she had worked that floor for 22 years and had seen everything. She's the one who actually sat down on the edge of my bed that evening and said, "Honey, do you have anyone who can come be with you?" And when I didn't answer right away, she said, "It's okay. Some people don't." Not unkindly, just factually, like she'd said it enough times that it had stopped being sad and become just a thing that was true about the world. I called my sister in Savannah. She was there by the next morning. She drove through the night. She didn't even ask if I needed her. She just said, "I'm coming," and hung up, and 4.5 hours later, she was sitting in the chair next to my bed with a bag of things she'd packed for me. My own toothbrush, my face wash, a photograph of my husband from the mantel that I don't think she planned to bring, but grabbed at the last second. That's the kind of person she is. My daughter called on day 2, not to ask how I was, to explain. She said they had been on a digital detox. She said it was something her therapist had recommended. She said she was sorry she missed the hospital's calls, but they had genuinely not had their phones on them. She said this in a tone that suggested I should understand and also perhaps appreciate that she was taking care of her mental health. I listened to the whole thing. I let her finish. Then I said, "You were my emergency contact." Silence. "That's not a casual thing," I said. "That's not a title. If you didn't want that responsibility, you should have told me." More silence. "And then, and I will never forget this as long as I live," she said, "Mom, I didn't know you were going to fall." I said, "No one ever does." She came to see me on day 4, drove up from the airport in a rental car, wore her good jeans and a blazer like she was coming to a meeting rather than a hospital, brought flowers that still had the airport gift shop sticker on the cellophane. She sat for an hour and a half and spent most of it on her phone and then said she needed to get back because the kids had school on Monday. Her husband did not come. I spent 9 days in that hospital. My sister stayed for 5 of them, sleeping in the recliner chair because the family lounge down the hall had a broken heat vent, and she refused to sleep where I couldn't find her if I needed her. My neighbor brought food. My book club came in 2s and 3s and sat around my bed and made me laugh. My daughter sent a fruit basket on day 6, one of those ones that comes in cellophane shaped like a vase, with the chocolate-dipped strawberries on skewers. It was nice. It was also nothing. When I came home, I couldn't do the stairs for the first 3 weeks. My sister rearranged my entire main floor so I could sleep on the pull-out in the study. She set up a little station for me, medications, water, the TV remote, my book, my phone charger. She labeled things. She made casseroles and put them in labeled containers in the freezer. She is 70 years old herself and has her own bad knee, and she did all of this without being asked, and without complaining, and without once making me feel like a burden. My daughter called every few days. The calls were about 8 minutes long on average. I know because I started noticing. About 5 weeks after I came home, when I was finally able to get around well enough on my own, I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast with my children for 20 years, and I opened my laptop, and I started to look at some things. I looked at my will, which my husband and I had drawn up together and updated after he died. I looked at the property deed. I looked at the life insurance policy. I looked at the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. My daughter was on all of it, her and her brother split equally, which had always seemed fair and right. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called an estate attorney. Her office was downtown, and she had reviewed things for me once before, after my husband passed. I made an appointment for the following week. I didn't tell my daughter. There was no reason to. These were my accounts, my house, my policy, my decisions. I want to be careful here about what I say and how I say it, because I know how this part of the story can sound. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I wasn't trying to punish her. I've thought about that a lot since, and I genuinely don't think that's what it was. What it was, I think, was clarity. The fall had given me a kind of clarity that I hadn't had before. The kind that comes when something strips away all the stories you've been telling yourself and just shows you what's actually there. What was actually there was a daughter who had chosen a resort pool over an emergency contact call, who had showed up to my hospital room looking put together and left after 90 minutes, who called every few days for 8 minutes because she'd decided that was enough, who had somewhere along the way filed me under handle in her mind and moved on. And what was also there was a sister who had driven through the night, who had labeled my medicine bottles, who had a bad knee and still stayed 5 days in a hospital recliner without being asked. I restructured things, not entirely but significantly. My sister became the primary beneficiary on the life insurance and on the retirement accounts. I set up a specific bequest in the will for my grandchildren, for their education, designated to a trust that their parents cannot touch, because those children did not do anything wrong, and I was not going to hold them responsible for their mother. The house I thought about for a long time and ultimately decided to put into a revocable trust with conditions, which the attorney explained clearly and which I understood clearly, and which meant that certain decisions about it could not be made by anyone other than me while I was living. I did not call my daughter to tell her. She found out because she asked. It was about 2 months later. She had come up for a weekend visit, the first time she'd come up since the hospital, and on the second evening we were sitting on the back porch, and she brought up, in a roundabout way, the house. She'd been doing this for years, small comments here and there about how much work it was to maintain, how it was so big for just one person, how maybe at some point it might make sense to think about downsizing. I knew what those comments were. I had known for a long time. This time she was a little more direct. She mentioned that her husband had been looking at some numbers. She mentioned that the market was good. She mentioned that there were some lovely retirement communities in the area that had great amenities She said it so carefully, so reasonably, that if you hadn't been listening for it for years, you might have thought it was just practical concern. I looked at her over my sweet tea. I said, "Are you asking about the house?" She pulled back a little, said she was just thinking about my future, said she worried about me living alone. I said, "You've worried about me living alone for a while now." She said yes, she had. I said, "And when I fell and they called you 11 times, you didn't answer." She opened her mouth, closed it. "The house is in a trust," I said. "My attorney set it up last month. I'm not selling it. And the financial arrangements have been updated to reflect." I paused because I wanted to say this right, what I actually know about people, rather than what I assumed. The silence that came after that was one of the longer silences I've sat in. She asked what that meant. I told her, not with anger, not with a list of grievances. I just told her what I had changed and why, in the same way I would explain any practical decision. And when she started to talk about how unfair it was, about how she was my daughter, about how the digital detox had been recommended by a professional, I let her say all of it. And when she was done, I said, I know, and these are still my decisions to make. She left the next morning instead of Sunday. Her husband called me 3 days later. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that was 12 minutes long and covered a lot of ground. I listened to it once, saved it, and have not listened to it again. There was nothing in it I needed to respond to. What I did instead, I called my sister. I told her everything. We talked for 2 hours, and at the end she said something that I've thought about almost every day since. She said, you didn't take anything from her, you just stopped pretending she'd earned something she hadn't. I've been in my house now through another full winter. My ankle healed, the ribs healed, the concussion, the doctor said, was mild and left no lasting effects, though sometimes I think it rattled something loose in me in a way that was actually useful. I've been in the garden again. The tomatoes came up beautifully this past summer. I made sauce and jarred it and sent some down to my sister and gave some to my neighbor and kept the rest for myself. Simple things, good things. My daughter and I still talk, less than before, which is its own kind of answer. She is working through her feelings about the will, which I understand. I hope, eventually, she works through the more important question, why it happened. But I can't do that for her. You can't want someone's growth more than they want it for themselves. My grandchildren came to visit last August, just them, on a flight by themselves for the first time. The older one is 13 now, old enough. We made cookies. We went to the farmer's market. We watched movies on the couch with the cat between us. They asked me about their grandfather, and I showed them photos and told them stories. And the younger one, who has his great-grandfather's eyes, fell asleep halfway through one of them with his head on my shoulder. I sat very still, so I wouldn't wake him. Outside it was summer and warm, and the tomatoes were on the vine, and the house was full. I think about the woman on the hospital floor sometimes, the one who lay there for 50 minutes with a broken ankle and cracked ribs and a cat she didn't know yet had a concussion, waiting for the ambulance. I think about how still she was, how she didn't cry, how she kept herself together out of habit or stubbornness or just the muscle memory of 67 years. I think she deserved better than she'd been settling for. I think most of us do. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself in any part of it, not necessarily the fall, not necessarily the will, but the part where you slowly realize that someone has quietly filed you away underhandled, I want you to hear this, that feeling you keep explaining away, that thing you keep finding excuses for, that absence you keep minimizing because you don't want to make trouble, or seem demanding or hurt anyone's feelings. That feeling is information. It is telling you something true, and you're allowed to act on it. Not out of anger, not out of scorekeeping, but out of the same quiet clarity that comes when you stop telling yourself the story you wish were true and start seeing with open eyes the story that actually is. I'm not who I was before the fall. I'm not sure that woman would recognize this version of me, but I think she'd be relieved. I think she'd sit down on this porch with me and look at the garden and breathe out, finally, a breath she'd been holding for a very long time. I used to think that love was something you just knew was there, even when you couldn't see it, that the people who raised you, fed you, sat at your kitchen table for 20 years, that they understood on some level what they owed you. Not money, not obligation in the legal sense, just presence, just the willingness to pick up the phone. What the fall taught me, what lying on that floor for 50 minutes actually taught me, is that love without follow-through is just a feeling someone has about themselves. My daughter loved me in the way that felt good to her. The calls on her schedule, the visit that lasted 90 minutes and ended because her kids had school. That's not cruelty. I don't think she's a cruel person. But it is a kind of moral carelessness, and I spent too many years mistaking it for enough. There's something I've come to believe about character, and it's this. Who a person is shows up most clearly not in the easy moments, but in the inconvenient ones. Paulette, the nurse who had worked that floor for 22 years, chose kindness at the end of a long shift with a stranger she'd never met. My sister chose to drive through the night on a bad knee without being asked. My daughter chose a resort pool and a caption about no obligations. None of them were performing. They were just being exactly who they are when no one is making it easy for them. That's the only honest measure I know. I don't say this to condemn my daughter. I say it because I spent years making excuses that allowed me to avoid seeing it clearly, and the excuses cost me something. They cost me the kind of honest assessment that lets you make real decisions about your own life. Wisdom, the real kind, not the kind that sounds good in a card, isn't about knowing more facts. It's about being willing to look at what's actually in front of you, even when the looking is uncomfortable, even when what you see requires you to change something you'd rather leave alone. And then there is the matter of what you do with what you see. That's the part nobody talks about enough. Seeing clearly is one thing. Acting on it, rewriting the will, making the phone call, sitting across from your daughter on the back porch and saying the quiet part out loud. That takes something different. It takes the kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It's not dramatic. It's not angry. It's just steady. It's waking up the morning after a hard conversation and making your coffee and tending your garden and deciding quietly that you are going to keep going on your own terms. My sister labeled my medicine bottles. That image stays with me. Such a small thing. Such a completely reliable thing. I want to be that for the people I love. I want to be the person who shows up, who labels the bottles, who drives through the night. I don't always manage it, but it's what I'm aiming for, and I think the aiming matters. If this story stirred something in you, I hope it's not just anger at my daughter or warmth toward my sister. I hope it's a question about your own life, about who is actually showing up for you, about whether you are showing up, honestly, inconveniently, without the fruit basket and the airport sticker, for the people who need you, and about whether, if you fell tomorrow, you would be proud of what the people you love would do. I am the clarity I have now. It cost me 50 minutes on a cold floor and a relationship that will probably never be what I once hoped it was. But I have my garden and my sister and my grandchildren asleep on the couch, and the quiet knowledge that my life is arranged around what is real. That is not a small thing, that is everything.